Well, good morning. My name is James Wilmot, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this online Digital Europe event on security in the digital age. Before I hand the floor to Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, who will steer the discussions during this morning's session, it's my job to briefly talk you through how we'll be using this event platform today. So some of you may be familiar with the platform and others less so, but I wanted to point you in the direction of where you can have your say during today's session and where you can interact both with each other as attendees and with today's speakers. So firstly, you're watching this in the stage area of the platform. On the right-hand side of your screen, on the sidebar, you will see the chat and the Q&A tabs. And in a departure for those who have used the platform before, from previous events, we've now separated out the chat from the Q&A. So within the Q&A tab, and you're welcome to click on that tab now if you wish, if you have something you would like to ask, please do so in here. And there's a new feature. Other participants can now upvote your questions, a layer of welcome democracy to the system, helping us to focus on the most pressing questions that are coming through. And the panel will try to answer as many questions as they can in the time that we have. So the chat function remains a space where you can engage with each other and post your comments, and we'll also be keeping an eye on that chat area for anything that we can feed into the discussions as well. Finally, on the left-hand side, there is the networking tab. We'll keep the platform open for around 30 minutes after the close of the event, and you'll have the opportunity to use this feature, and I would encourage you to do so. If you have any questions or need any support, drop us a note in the chat and we'll come straight back to you. And a reminder that the hashtag for today's session is Security Digital Age. So with that, I will hand the floor to Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, the Director General at Digital Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Always on point. And welcome everybody to this event called Security in the Digital Age. And how can public and private sector combine their innovations and collaborate much better? I'm the Director General of Digital Europe. We represent around 36,000 digitalizing companies in Europe. We have a huge interest in aligning interest on the security and privacy area. It is not a secret that many of the inventions today within the security area, but also within civil innovation of technology, are done by the private sector. And security and in the society increasingly depend on the collaboration between the institutions, the private sector, the public sector, and of course different players like NATO and EU. So this is exactly the title that we will, and the subject that we will be discussing today. How can we collaborate more efficiently? And how can we boost innovation and collaboration in the future on the security area, but also on civil technology innovations for the benefit of society? So let me just introduce you to the speakers. We have some really excellent speakers here today. We have David van Weel, that I also worked with as a part of the NATO group on emerging and disruptive technologies. We have Günter Koinegg, who is the SVP of Global Head of Defense and Space and Homeland Security of Atos. And of course, François, Arbault, Director of Defense Industry Space from DEFIS and from the European Commission. And not least, Izabela, Albrycht, Chair of the European Cybersecurity Forum, CYBERSEC, and also on the Board of Directors of Digital Europe. So I hope that we will basically have a very dynamic discussions today. But let me start a little bit by giving you an intro of some of the work that has been done in this area. If you could bring up my slides, Anna, please. So as I said before, Digital Europe represent a lot of companies, digitalizing companies in Europe, not only digital companies, but also from the manufacturing sector, the health sector, and many other sectors. We have 40 associations in 35 countries, European countries, and meaning that we have a great network of SMEs, of big companies, of foreign players, of European headquarters business. So many of the things that we do really are tested on ground with many different types of stakeholders. We do digital policies, meaning privacy, security, and everything that is there, sustainability, infrastructure. But we also do, we enhance innovations, and we are looking at how to drive projects within Europe that can benefit and make the benefits of digitalization real on ground. So, taking the next slide. One of the things that we're engaged in, or I personally engaged in, is the NATO Advisory Group on EDT. So it's Emerging and Disruptive Technologies report. And it came out with 5 key areas of investment and interest: machine learning and AI, quantum, cybersecurity, hardware, so IoT, robotics, and materials, as it says here. These are kind of what we would call dual use technologies, all of them. And they are some of the technologies that will enhance security and growth in society in general. And we were looking at exactly what will they do in the security agenda, but how can we also enhance dual use for the benefits of the society and the growth in general. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we have been coming out with as recommendations is the talent development. Of course, without the talent development, no technologies will go very far. So translating the use of these technologies into people's everyday life, but also into skills that can take them to the next level on innovation is absolutely key. Clear NATO innovation mission. So what are they trying to achieve? And explore new innovation of investment mechanisms. Is there a way, a venture capital fund, an investment bank that can really bring these benefits much closer to society? And how can, NATO collaborate with other institutions like the EU and other international organizations that have the same goal of technology growth, innovation, and not least, of course, security. Security long-term, for example, on something like environmental catastrophes, they will have a huge impact on the future of security in the world. So how can we already now boost, the technology to support this, from prevent it from happening, and enhancing security in this area? So if we look also, how can we make sure that NATO, together with EU and other players, play an active role in how to look at common data rules and access to technology? Next slide, please. So factors of success. At least we looked at 2 main factors of success, which is one, and network of accelerator, and something like a venture capital mechanisms or funds that can basically be used for boosting the growth in these 5 technology areas. Also, how can we boost the private-public partnerships and how we work together, and to also get the uptake of technology into the society, making the world much more resilient, and as I said before, making sure that we innovate in the areas that has a serious impact on future security, such as, for example, shortage of resources or environmental damage. And no doubt that this collaboration between the industry, government, and academia will play a major role here. Industry is usually the one that takes action into the real world. Governments makes the decisions, and academia invents cool stuff that we couldn't think of. So how do we make this triangle basically work together for the benefit of the security agenda? Next slide, please. So today, the key questions are, which new technologies should our focus of investment be on? How can we promote synergies between the industry and the public sector, and really make things happen, not only long-term, but also in shorter term? What are good examples? I'm sure that our speakers can think of, great examples of how we have done this efficiently already, and bring the power of the example into this discussion. And how can EU and NATO work closer together on innovation? Of course, again, with the private sector involved. So let's go to the first question. I will not do another round of introductions, but I will go straight to the first question to David. David, you've also been, I think you've been with NATO for a year or so, and your role is to basically overlook emerging security challenges for NATO. May I ask you, if you look at the NATO advisory group on EDTs, on EU high-level representative statements, and the European Council, all of them highlighted, a tighter collaboration between the EU and NATO. Is that a coincidence, or is it like a trend that is upcoming, that you see a closer collaboration between those stakeholders?
Well, I would love to say, Cecilia, and thank you for the opportunity of being here, and great to work with you again here. I would love to say that it's all part of a grand strategy, but I think it's a bit of both. It is coincidence, and it is a trend. And the trend basically derives from the fact that probably as governments, so that's both EU, but also NATO, and on a national level, we've become detached from the sharp edge of innovation over the past decades. So from a commercial point of view, we have reduced the R&D budgets, both on the defense and security side, but also on the government side as a whole, in favor of commercializing the inventive and innovative, but even the academic world in our Western societies. And this has led to great achievements. We have flourishing, innovative ecosystems on our soils. And we have the largest amount of patents and new technologies coming out of the Western democracies. So that's all good news. On the other hand, from different angles, we're also seeing that we've become too far detached from this ecosystem. So whether you look at it from an economic security point of view, or you look at it from a defense and security point of view, basically the connections between the academia, the innovative sector, which is mainly the startup and small medium enterprises community, and the defense communities has become too distant. From that aspect, I would say that we have to get closer to this community. We have to get acquainted with each other from both sides again. We have to look at the impacts of technologies, not only on our societies, but also on our defense and security. And for that, we need to engage with this sector. We need to invest in this sector. We need to become a player again. And it's not a coincidence, of course, that both for NATO, from the collective defense and security angle, as for the EU, when it comes down to economic security, in a broader sense, and societal security, that the initiatives pop up on both sides. And to be honest, it is for me a clear situation where NATO and EU are mutually reinforcing. We cannot invest enough in our future technologies and security.
Thanks so much, David. You could have taken the honor of saying, yes, it's a grand plan, but okay, you didn't. But I think, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when we see exactly like you mentioned, the importance of technology and the importance of the collaboration and the investment in with private sector is increasingly important, basically, as many of the inventions are done there. But also, I know that NATO have several innovation functions that are extremely cutting edge thinking. So I think it can be a mutual benefit for both parties. Let me go to you, Günter. You are the SVP and Global Head of Defense and Space for Homeland Security at Atos. Can you give us the major perspective of this dual use and leading edge technologies? What's your major focus, and is it leading to more opportunities or more complexity?
Thank you, Cecilia. Definitely a very important question to answer and ask. But first of all, thank you for having me here and having us as Atos here at this important panel. Give us the chance to discuss with you. Clearly, dual use creates opportunities, and even go further. Dual use for me is a must to innovate at the speed we need to innovate. And yes, of course, it brings complexity, but this complexity is something we can master and we have to master. And dual use is also in industry sectors today a very common practice. So stepping to another industry, taking Formula One and the serial cars. This is classically dual use. You innovate very fast in deep technology in the Formula One, you translate in the serial car, and vice versa. You test in the serial car and loop back. And if you translate this to security technology, to defense technology, we have to do the same here as well, and we do with our clients today. Talking about the defense use case, we have NATO here as well. When we talk digital battlefield as one example, we would never be at the speed to have good digital battlefield solutions if we would not use digital solutions which are tested in the real old digital world, means the private digital world. So doing swarm control, integrating fast computing components into tanks, we have to use what is there on the private world, secure it, harden it, and translate it then in the use cases we have in defense. And of course, also vice versa, as you rightfully said, Cecilia, we inventing many things in defense and security, which we have to translate back. And for us as Atos, if you ask us on our priorities, we are an European IT player, and this is really important for us. And therefore, we work, of course, on European technology, supporting here also Europe to define new cybersecurity technology, to define compute technology, and also develop and industrialize. Also work jointly on the edge of quantum, where we are a leader in Europe as well. But we do this with, of course, a European mindset, but staying open to be interoperable, to have the choice to interact with other technologies. We cannot block ourselves. We have to collaborate. We have to interact while keeping some principles in mind, which is, of course, data sovereignty, which is digital sovereignty, which we have to increase as EU, but with a very open mindset to have the choice of autonomy, as President Charles Michel said that. So coming back to the business question, yes, for us, definitely this is an opportunity, and even more, this is a must and not a threat.
Thank you so much, and it's very refreshing that you're actually giving very concrete examples. I think that even this meeting today, I mean, the internet is a very good example itself, isn't it? I think you spoke about interoperability. There is one thing for sure that private sector knows better than, and so do you, than others, that cybersecurity and threats, they don't really care about borders. So I think this is extremely important to keep in mind, that whether it's European or whether it's from other continents, cyber does not really differentiate where it comes from. So thank you so much, Günter. Now turning to you, François. The Commission's action plan on synergies between civil defense and space industries. The action plan came out on the 22nd of February. What does it mean in practice, and how can we secure that these EU funds, both in the European Defence Funds and the RRF, are spent efficiently? What's the plans there?
Thank you, Cecilia, and thanks for having me here as well. And just to set the record right, I'm in charge of the defense industry, but not of space. I think that would be probably too much for a single person. But as you said already, we are working very hard on synergies, so between, of course, defense, space, and the civilian technologies. Well, I think that the previous speakers have said it all. I mean, indeed, we see a convergence of technologies. Of course, this is triggered by the digital transformation that really unifies very much, let's say, all the needs around, the question of the collection of information, the storage of information, the processing of information, and of course the communication, which have to be secured, in many respects, but all the more, of course, that we are discussing defense and security. So let's say the investments in new technologies are absolutely essential. They need considerable investments. We have to keep up with the pace of innovation, and to achieve that, the only way is to first foster cross-border cooperation, of course, across the borders of Europe and possibly even beyond. We need also to bring all sort of different players together. And it was already said that indeed we see, for instance, in the defense sector, which I'm working in, we see that a lot of innovation is coming from non-traditional players. I mean, of course, a lot of innovation is coming from the defense sector, but also increasingly we see new players from the the digital, let's say, area bringing a lot of innovation. So we have, if we want to keep up the pace, we have to bring all these players together, traditional, non-traditional, to make sure that we really are basically in possession of the top-notch technology. For that, we are inciting, cooperation across the borders. I said, for instance, with the European Defence Fund to talk about defence. I mean, of course, the EDF is a game changer with 8 billion euros over the next, 7 years. So this we really hope precisely to extract a lot of innovation from this new incentive to cooperate across the borders. Not only to pull, let's say, the immense cost of innovation, but also to confront cultures, and to trigger innovation just by confronting different cultures, different ways of seeing things, in a sector that has been very much dominated by, let's say, national lines and cultures so far. But of course, on top of our programs, and also, the space program will also offer a lot of new opportunities to cooperate. I mean, just think of this new ambition to develop, a space-based secure connectivity, for instance. So we're doing a lot in the context of the new programs, the defense programs, the space programs. But as you said, we have this new action plan on synergies, which very much ambitions to tap the unexploited potential of synergies between the EU programs. We have a lot of programs, in the digital, let's say, area, which very well, managed basically by DigiConnect here in the Commission. We have the Defense Fund, we have the space programs, so we cannot let these programs work in the corridor. We have to compare notes. We have to make sure that priorities are very much, let's say, coordinated within the remit, of course, of what each program can do. And then we have also to exploit all the synergies, and for that we are coming up with a number of actions to make sure indeed that those synergies are taking place. And we are focusing, for instance, on a number of flagships, which are very promising. For instance, on drone technologies. What can let's say the defense sector learn from the civil sector and vice versa on space-based secure connectivity? Again, we know it's a major, very promising, let's say, a perspective that we need to open up and to exploit. Space traffic management, for instance, is another example of where basically space is very relevant to defense. There can be, of course, defense, breakthroughs which can be relevant to the civilian sector. I mean, we know that indeed connectivity relies very much on space. So all this is converging in terms of technologies, and we have to actually adapt to that to make sure that that indeed we are making the best out of the taxpayers' money. And this we will achieve by making sure that all the relevant players work together in a way that they were not necessarily used to in the past.
Thank you so much. And I think actually even during the crisis, we have really seen how the space and the satellite has meant that we could make green lanes for transportation and handle several things via connections. So thank you for mentioning these very concrete examples, François. So turning to you, Izabela, so we have this broad discussion about innovative civilian tech and security technologies. How can they cross-fertilize each other? And you are a specialist in cybersecurity. What do you see of major innovations here in this space?
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me and this important discussion. As you know, within the CyberSec forum, we have been underlining the importance of cyber security for over a couple of years, and now I can see that this topic is very high on the political and security agenda, which is very good. And I think that it is just the right moment, to say that cybersecurity, innovative products and services are the most important actually to build back better cyberspace, which is now targeted by malicious attacks and disruptions by state and non-state actors. But security is also of crucial importance while we are dynamically innovate in the field of emerging and disruptive technologies, implementing and planning to apply this next generation of digital technologies to build hyper connected and even more complex digital world. And these technologies, whether of civil or military provenance, as well as their applications in both military and civilian spheres, which you mentioned, and their interactions have to be first and foremost cyber secure. So the field for cyber innovation here is huge. So far, we have been creating the digital world, which is full of flaws, bugs, and exploits, unfortunately, ready to be used by adversaries to cause even physical disruption with security implications for international relations. So for over last years, it has become digital battlefield, which is very often used by state actors. And we know that Russia, North Korea, China have on their accounts many cyber attacks attributed to them directly and not directly. And the cyber threat landscape is getting more and more complicated. Almost all technologies, as we said, are all of dual use nature and can have disruptive effects also on defense capabilities. So a few years ago, not too many of us were thinking that 5G, smart cities, or AI can be used in the adversarial way. It has now changed, and we know that infrastructure such as new generation networks is important from the military point of view, and it is under the NATO civil preparedness requirements. We know that smart cities can be weaponized. We also know that AI augmented cyber attacks are not science fiction anymore, and the same is with the potential misuse of IoT devices or autonomous cars. So the digital surface, which needs to be secured and protected, is significantly expanding, and its dimensions, civil defense, but also space, are now cross-cutting and interpenetrate. And it is true that the cybersecurity market has been growing exponentially for over a decade, but due to the unprecedented pace of technological progress, it has to start innovate also at the exponential pace, looking for very effective, tailored solutions and even like holy grails of security. And we need to install these innovative secure solutions into those new emerging and disruptive technologies in a systemic way. And we need to also start the process of securing the previous generation of digital technologies, the already deployed ones, to make internet less adversarial as soon as possible. And here governments have to understand these needs and create appropriate incentives, but also boost developments of innovative cyber products and services. I would actually classify the cybersecurity products and services in the category of deep technologies, which require patient capital, support and incentives to deliver on real and important breakthroughs and advances, and as I said, looking for the holy grails of cybersecurity. So maybe I will finish here, but also adding that in the Kościuszko Institute, which I'm chairing, we also established the cybersecurity cluster, Cyber Made in Poland, and we are trying to facilitate cyber small and medium enterprises as well as startups to align with this security needs at this moment, and I think that all countries should do the same. There are some advanced countries in that respect, but there are also some which are lagging behind.
Thank you so much for your thought leadership, Izabela, and for your always to the point highlighting that for private sector, I mean, this is of high importance, right? I mean, this is also why Digital Europe and our members, we have been advocating for example, sharing of vulnerabilities, making sure that we have a common understanding on how to address specific attacks, where we can work across private and public sector to make sure that we address this in a way that is all about speed, right? The innovation, as you say, the innovations needs to be faster. The good guys needs to be faster than the bad guys.
Yeah,
and
unfortunately, it is not this way. Still,
for the good guys to be faster than the bad guys, it also takes that we collaborate across the different, that we don't build silos of institutions or sectors, but that we are able to handle crisis of, for example, cyber attacks across private and public sector. So thank you. So maybe turning back to you, David, and I must say I'm really happy to see also NATO really engaging in this in this agenda. Now David is leaving. Maybe he is coming back again. Okay.
Yes, I am. No,
okay, very good.
I'm in the studio, but I'm on my own. So if you mute my microphone, then I have to go all the way to the other side of the studio to put it back on. So I'll be very silent, but please leave my microphone on.
I said, David, I'm so glad to see you, and you get out of the room. No, but David, I am really truly honored to have you here. I think it's extremely important that we have this collaboration between the NATO allies and the EU and the private sector. And well, if you look a little bit at NATO's priorities when it comes to encouraging this multiple use technology, I mean, I know that we also discussed it's not only about just defense, it's also about peacemaking activities, which is a huge part of what NATO actually does, preventing catastrophes, preventing conflict. What are the main roadblocks on the way? What are the priorities, and how do you see the next steps forward?
Thanks for the question, Cecilia, and also for the answers of the other panelists, because they really ring home as we're venturing into this world, or as I stated, re-venturing into this world. So the security and defense sector used to be at the base of innovation, used to be standard setting when it comes down to new techniques. I remember in the times back in the old days when I was a naval officer, I used to work with a GPS signal that was more accurate than the civilian one. And basically the tables have turned, and Günter referred to this when he said, well, it's great, we can use the private sector technology and then harden and secure it a bit and implement it in the defense world. But what we're missing is security by design into new technologies. What we're missing is protecting new technologies from leaking away of intellectual property. What we're missing is the standard setting or the application of principles of responsible use when new technologies are developed. So we need to re-engage from the security sector into the world of deep tech, into the world of academia, into the cutting edge of innovation, because that's where we need to be if we want to be fast, adopt at the speed of relevance, but also create the preconditions for a world of technology that actually fits our Western values, our democratic values, our privacy values. If we're not engaged from the first moment, then our adversaries will probably be setting the standards for us. So we have a lot of catching up to do. That means that a priority for us is to re-engage with the sector. That also means you need to invest in the sector. I mean, other than the vested defense sector companies, startups and scale-ups are, they need money to pay for their personnel tomorrow, for the innovation tomorrow. They can't be on tenders for 10 years hoping to get a big contract from NATO. So we need to be active there. That means investing with a risk. We need to take risks because not everything will flourish. Some things will fail. But the added benefit we can give is that we can also create a sort of a trusted brand of technology where you adhere to the principles and the values that we find important in developing technology. And to do that, we need to understand technology better. So priorities for us at NATO now, for me, is to have a data framework policy in place, which we don't at the moment. And I would say that most tech-savvy companies do. So it's the backbone of most of these dual-use technologies, and we need to catch up. The second priority, or actually we're going hand in glove there, is to have an AI strategy. Not that we're very far behind the curve, but I think it's imminent with this technology that's really penetrating our society now, that we get a grip as to what we find acceptable as use of AI, which principles of responsible use do we want to apply, we agree on, what standards, what applications, how do we engage with the industry. So those are the two that will come out before summer. And then probably next year, we will venture into an autonomy strategy, because that's, of course, the classic example where AI, data, autonomy get together in the field of, as they're called, killer robots. But to have this discussion from a security point of view, actually cleanly looking at the technology, I think provides us with a much more rational debate than we've seen up till now in the public domain. But it requires us to re-engage. That's basically my main message.
Thank you so much, David. And also very refreshing to see, and we had discussion on this also before, that you are engaging in, for example, AI, use of AI, how, what are the games of engagement on both cybersecurity and on AI. And this is also something that we've also seen, as you know, EU really engaging is. I've been engaged in the high-level group for artificial intelligence in the EU to define the 7 principles of trustworthy artificial intelligence. And I do think that NATO has a very important role to play here. So thank you for that, and for highlighting that, SMEs, they cannot engage in huge, slow tenders forever lasting. We just, as Izabela said, the good guys needs to be faster than the bad guys, and we all need to work towards that. So maybe turning to you, Günter, again. Now you hear, EU saying that, we're willing to work with SMEs, with the ecosystem, with private players. You hear NATO saying the same. I mean, you have tried this for quite some time, I would say. You have some experience. I mean, what can we do better? What can we learn from the past? What is it this time that we do better than the past? This is not like, it's a little bit old wine in new bottles, hopefully a bit more sparkling than before, but how do we do this right this time?
So I really appreciate all the comments given today, and it shows me that we are thinking in the right direction, and this is the brilliant starting point. But now it's about walk the talk, and this is a key point. And coming to David's statement, which I 100% agree, what we have to manage is to do this collaboration and the interaction by design, not by process over 3 years, and first we do a consultation, then we do a tender. This has to be an ongoing communication loop between private sector and public sector to innovate, which from my point of view is a key point. When we talk about security by design, you mentioned, David, but also Izabela mentioned we need to move in that direction. And here we have one key challenge. Of course, in cybersecurity, still the human is the most attackable effect. This is still the case, but Izabela brought examples which will be the future of cyber attacks, and this will be via smart ecosystems, via digitalization. If we want to prevent that, we need to master technology. And to give you a few examples that here we have a big room to improve is if you want to master cyber attacks in the future, especially if they're driven by big organizations like states, compute is key. You have to automate, you have to analyze, you have to have the big machines doing a big part of this job for you. If we today have a look on a high-performance computer, Europe is able, and this is the high-end computing where we are good in, yeah. Europe is able to master 50% of the supply chain only. The rest of the supply chain is out of our hand. So we don't know what is happening in these components. We don't know in detail. We cannot enter. So if you want to make security by design, we need to enter and be able to master technology as well. If you go to quantum computing, the next level of improving security significantly, but also bringing complete new threats. If you have a look on quantum patents, 75 to 80% of the patents are coming from US and Canada. 75 to 80%. Followed then by China and Japan. And then around this 5% are coming from Europe. This 5% from Europe are coming from 2 organizations. And this is worrying for a European citizen. We have to increase, from my point of view, really this technology mastering, not talking about communication, also a similar situation. So here we have to put our focus on. Here we have to put a joint focus between public, civil, and education and research. And not stopping after research and inventing a product, we have to also industrialize that. And this is key. Also linking back then to the comment I gave before, that we are having this choice for autonomy, but are fully collaborative, interoperable cross organizations. This has to be our focus. And taking one last sentence on education, which for me is a key point. We all know that we miss thousands of cybersecurity and security competent people. Have we changed so dramatically and fast our education, which we would need to serve that? Have we motivated the company, public authorities to build up their own training systems for cybersecurity competence, which even would be a more multiplier than only education? So I think here are many items where we have to put focus, and we have to do this jointly by design between public and the civil world and the education world. And this is where we shall put together our focus on, from my point of view, from our point of view, in the upcoming future.
Thank you so much. Also very concrete examples, and maybe also a little bit telling, François, why you have a very challenging job. Very exciting. You know, there is nothing like a good challenge. You know, having all the European countries coming together, doing investment together, and then of course also collaborating internationally at the same time, right? So how do we get back on our toes, and could you maybe how can we offer this world-class industrial cooperation? How is the Commission positioning itself to strengthen this cooperation? And do you see similarity or differences between NATO and this space?
Thank you, Cecilia. I mean, a lot has been said by the other speakers again, and we could talk for hours, which is, of course, not a possibility. I mean, clearly, we need comprehensive approaches, and again, it's not another slogan. We see, I mean, the threats are unifying. I mean, we are, in my directorate, we're also coordinating the work on hybrid threats in the Commission. So we see a continuum of threats. They're more and more hybrid, and we have also to take a comprehensive approach to technologies, because again, there are major unifying trends in technology. This is, in a nutshell, the digital transformation, and we need to also take a broad approach in terms of ecosystems. This was mentioned already by David, I think, but also by Günter. It's not only about boosting technologies via funding of research and development projects. This is about skills. This is about a culture which is integrating a lot of different factors. So I mean, this approach in terms of ecosystem, which is very much promoted by Thierry Breton, is really our roadmap. We have to act on every element of that aerospace and defense ecosystem. And there's, again, one ecosystem. There are different markets. They're working very differently, but you find actually very often the same players. Again, there are new entrants in those sectors. So we have to be smart. This is complex. We have to be very comprehensive in the way we do things. Again, we have to work on synergies. But the key thing that we're trying to achieve is, again, to create that reflex of working together across the borders, not only to have, let's say, deeper pockets in terms of capacity of investment, not only in terms of funding research and development, but also in terms of funding infrastructures. And for instance, the Commission is doing a lot when it comes to indeed high computing, secured clouds. I mean, I think more needs to be done. But comprehensive approaches, working together to strengthen mutually, let's say, our efforts, including also, of course, everybody has to actually be aligned with the others. I mean, NATO, EU, we see those issues from different perspectives, but of course, we are aiming at the same, to be able to acquire and to deploy very effective, top-notch systems and technologies. So we can indeed, exchange on emerging, on disruptive technologies. There is a specific budget earmarked in the European Defence Fund to fund disruptive technologies. We have indeed a specific budget, let's say, for SMEs. And of course, I mean, NATO is a military alliance. The EU is another animal, but we have broadly, the same membership. And what is absolutely key, and I will stop with that, is that we are aligned. Because, for instance, what we're trying to achieve with the EDF has to be very much in line with the planning which is done by the member states of their, research and development effort. And this is basically the big member states really heavily investing in defense are planning, in 20 years time horizon. So if we are not aligned between what we do in the EU, what we do in the member states, and what also NATO basically requires its members to actually, invest on, we will lose out. So, I mean, we need to pull in the same direction. This is, again, as always, big issues are complex, and they need, again, to be tackled in a comprehensive manner. But I think we see clearly that there is really kind of common willingness to talk, to exchange on those major challenges, to make sure that indeed we join forces to keep up the pace, because we simply, as I said, cannot afford to fall behind in terms of technologies. On the battlefield, to protect citizens, but also our soldiers on the battlefield, we have to be one step ahead in terms of handling the data, securing, acting against cyber threats. So we have to invest massively again in processors, in data protection. I mean, in terms of storage, fight against cyber, secure communication. This is really the commonality of issues on which we all need to invest at every level. I mean, in terms of the different international organizations, but also between the national level and the, let's say, international organizations level. I will stop
Thank you
here.
so much. Yeah, no, thank you so much, and thank you also for highlighting. I mean, that stakeholders are pulling in the right direction, and I think we're coming down to at least one thing is that keeps on repeating itself. How are we going to get in a position where we're fast enough, right? How do we get that, all the super tanker of NATO and the EU basically to move in an agile way that normally only private sector does, and sometimes even private sectors, fail on. So how do we get that collaboration of many different bodies and mechanisms and processes to collaborate? So Izabela, turning to you, defining and doing things in an interoperable way is very key to international cooperation. How do you see the interaction between technical standards, ethical standards, and for example, how it's done in EU and NATO when they look at AI? I mean, What's your approach to that?
Thank you, Cecilia. Well, this is an interesting question, and I will, since I'm a political scientist, I will answer this question from maybe like the broader and big picture, let's say, security perspective. So we already said that parallelly to growing geopolitical tensions and challenges, we are continuing to deploy at unprecedented speed this new emerging and disruptive technologies into our economies, societies, and all military domains, so air, land, sea, cyber, and space. And this deployment will broaden the vulnerability landscape, for sure, and we also said that a couple of times, but it is also likely that it will draw like geopolitical borders along technological systems driven by standards and values with states grouping around them. I mean, this is possible. And it will have like security implications and defense for sure. So for me, this is basically a question about geopolitics of cyberspace. And in the digital era, geography is not only a layer where countries are projecting their power, soft and hard power. And there is also cyberspace with its components and technologies being powerful tools. And technical standards are to secure the cyberspace with its infrastructure, ICT components and equipment in the way which will make them also less vulnerable to the hard power projection with cyber attacks and cyber weapons. And certain technical standards must be met by ICT products to call them secure and let us be confident that they will not be used to compromise the whole ecosystem of digital world. In terms of the key domain of software production and implementation, standards should be perceived more like ongoing excellence process rather than a fixed list of features. In other words, technical standards are aimed at diminishing the ability of our adversaries to project their hard power to gain physical and also military effects. And whilst ethical standards are rather about the soft power projection in cyberspace. So the values, also political values, which we as political West live up to here, but we want to also see those values being implemented abroad. And ethical standards, in my opinion, are to project our democracy, free and open society, rule of law, privacy, human integrity, responsible use of technologies and cyberspace itself. And those must be met while we innovate in order to protect our way of life in the new digital world. So the democracy, the worst form of government except for all the others, is actually worth to be projected and protected in cyberspace. And the threat that democracy will not be a predominant political system is now obvious with China's expressed and proclaimed ambition to gain global tech supremacy. That is why we need to standardize technologies which are surrounding us in a way which will not affect us as open and democratic societies, in the very core of this concept, and in a way which will not be exposed, which will not to expose us to malicious activities with possible cyber, physical, and military effects. And close interoperable cooperation on technological security of the future, both within NATO and within and between EU, is of course key area that requires a political deep focus from political and business leaders. And here I can refer to AI, because this is the technology which can actually empower or overpower us as humans, and this control technology might occur to be uncontrollable, being a major disruptive but also transformational and general technology with applications in military and civilian spheres. As AI is a good example that we need to consider. It's both the bright and dark side. The high performance computing mentioned already, which run AI, can be hackable, data can be manipulated, and algorithms can be triggered. So while we are developing AI, we need to build, the security by design, but also values by design to make sure that we will safeguard AI application and not harm as humans. And European institutions are having dozens of files, I would say, open with regulatory and policy proposals aiming at developing, deploying key technologies safely and sustainably. NATO, and we heard from David, is also working on AI strategy, and those efforts should be aligned, and cybersecurity by design and values by design need to be implemented into this process for sure.
Thank you so much. No, I think it comes to the core of it, right? A lot of institutions are doing a lot of things. Let's try to actually do it together instead of competing in who is the best one in doing so. I always say a party normally is much more fun when there is other people around you. So I would maybe we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to do like 1 minute on one question from the audience, 1 minute on the other, and then round it off to make sure that everybody gets out of this great event on time to their next commitments. So starting with you, David, there's a question from Alessandro Riccardo, and he is asking, do you think that the defense and security sector could be on the agenda of possible EU-US Trade and Technology Council? I'm going to put that to you, François, and then I'll give it the other one to you, David. On the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, if yes, what would be the main priority? So will defense and security, cybersecurity, etc., be on the agenda of the EU-US Trade and Technology Council? And if yes, what would be the main priority in your views, François?
Indeed, I think there is a lot to discuss. Between the like-minded, I think it was said a number of times already that we have every interest to actually stay together and to make sure that indeed we are staying ahead of the curve in terms of technological capacity, precisely to defend and assert our values, our shared values. So I think in terms of, and I think that David insisted on that, and I didn't have time to elaborate on that, but I think that's very important. We have to be aware of what are the critical technologies we need to rely upon and invest upon for the future. We have to be also aware of potential weaknesses and exposures. Of course, not everything can be shared, but I think to a large extent we can look at, and the mapping of critical technologies is absolutely essential. And I think this is something that can be also the object of an exchange with our partners. Are we indeed able to rely? Are we fully autonomous in terms of the technologies that we critically need to protect our values? If there are loopholes, if there are weaknesses, how to fill those gaps? And I think this is typically an exchange that would be worth having, with all the partners of the EU, of course, including the US, obviously. So I think there is room for a serious discussion on the mapping and the acting upon where we see gaps in terms of our capacity to stay ahead of the curve in the technological race. Sorry.
Thank you so much, François. And maybe turning the last question to you, David, and I will run 2 minutes over time. I can see that already. Jonathan DeBild is asking, how will NATO be able to adjust their budgeting cycles and speed to the innovation of the AI solutions of the world? So what would you say, what's the silver bullet that makes sure that NATO can actually become this agile, fast-moving, innovative animal, David?
Well, come and work for me, I would say, and with Jonathan, and we'll make it work together. But it is a challenge in a multinational organization to ask for investments upfront, which don't have a clearly defined end goal, which is basically in the idea that you've posed with the advisory group to have a venture capital fund run by NATO is basically what you're doing. Is it completely new? No, on the EU side, we've seen that being used in the recovery fund. And I think that we don't need huge amounts of money from the public sector to go into a NATO fund in order to be able to attract, on the back of the NATO brand, private investments and venture capital from trusted capital markets. So I see it more as an accelerator, whereby NATO is at the tip of the spear, attracting a broader movement. So that's probably as feasible as I see it happening, and it needs to be somewhere outside the regular budget cycles. So that's my challenge for the coming month.
Great. Listen, a great thank you to all of you. I hope that you see that Digital Europe is really tapping into dedicating our efforts from private sector on making a more secure, planet where technology is used for the benefits of growth and for society and peace. Thank you so much for your contributions on behalf of the Digital Europe and our members. And I wish you a great day, and I hope that we'll meet each other in 1 year and that we will talk about what we have done, not what we will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.